You're welcome, and thank you for joining us, particularly on a Sunday. What time is it where you are?
It's 11 o'clock in the morning, so it's a great time for me, actually. Yeah.
Probably more convenient than me then. That's good.
Yeah, I'm a morning person, so unusual for rheumatoid arthritis. A lot of people with rheumatoid, they don't find themselves feeling good in the morning, but even if my joints are hurting, my energy is always better in the morning. So
Yes, I find out my brain is a morning person, my body is not, which always creates a bit of a clash.
I relate to that. Yeah.
Yeah. For anyone that's not aware of who you are, before we get into your arthritis journey, do you just maybe introduce yourself, tell us where you're from, that sort of thing?
Yeah. So I grew up on the West Coast of the United States. I'm from Seattle, Washington, and that's where I am now. And oh my gosh, my life story. I've done like a 45-minute video on just my diagnosis story, so I'm gonna try to condense it. But yeah, I was always a very active, sporty person. Played soccer, aka football. And my body started deteriorating when I was 19 and 20 years old out of the blue. It was very strange. I had no idea what was happening. And long story short, I got diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis right before my 21st birthday. And I'm 42 now. So it was about half my life ago. And my treatment journey I was pretty lucky to respond well to my first medications, which put me right into remission for 6 years, which I thought was going to last the whole rest of my life, but it ended up being more complicated than that. And I became an occupational therapist 6 years after my diagnosis. And a lot of people ask me, oh, did you become an occupational therapist because you have arthritis? And if the answer was yes, that would make my story very neat and tidy. But actually, no, I never got referred to occupational therapy for arthritis. I actually didn't know that occupational therapists could treat arthritis. I became an occupational therapist because I wanted to work with children with developmental disabilities or challenges. And I wanted to work one-on-one. I initially wanted to be a special education teacher. They call it special ed. I know some people don't like that term anymore, which I totally get. But anyway, long story short, because I learned so much in occupational therapy school about self-management, day-to-day strategies for pain and fatigue and mental health strategies for arthritis, I eventually, I started noticing when I was on social media after I graduated with my OT degree that people with arthritis were constantly saying why was I just given one 20-minute appointment and then left on my own? Where's the support? Where's the education like there is for other chronic conditions like diabetes? If you get diagnosed with diabetes, you get at least in the United States, you get weekly visits with a diabetes educator. And I was like, where's the arthritis educator? And then I decided I will become the arthritis educator.
There is that gap. I think we've probably talked about it in the past, because you and I have a few crossovers, even though I don't have RA, in that I didn't know OTs even existed, let alone could support with arthritis. It was completely foreign. I found that out embarrassingly in my 30s, and I felt ashamed by that, so it's not obviously a one-off experience.
Well, yeah. And so I should take a step back. If you don't know what occupational therapy is, my favorite way to explain it that I came up with, I don't know if other OTs agree, but it's kind of like if a psychologist and a physical therapist had a baby, because we do have we are often confused with physical therapists, but a huge difference between us is that mental health is directly in our scope of practice. And our job is to help you succeed with daily tasks and activities of daily living despite your injury, illness, or disability. So that if it's a stroke, it's being able to move the arm that you can't move and figure out how to adapt around that. If it's a child, with autism, your daily activities include things like social participation, communication, and so we look at the interaction between, it's not just about physical therapy, I think of as from the skin in, right? About your muscles and your structures. We understand those things, but we also look at the interaction between the person and the environment. And so for rheumatoid arthritis and inflammatory arthritis conditions, I think about it as think about a day in your life, all those little daily challenges that add up, like hand pain while trying to wash your hair, or trying to, put your clothes on, all the way up to like more complex tasks, like taking care of children, taking care of pets, work participation. We will help either people improve their abilities to do those tasks or adapt and compensate and work around those challenges. So I think it's like, yeah, it's the best health professional you've maybe never heard of. And it is, the magic words to get into occupational therapy, or to ask your doctor, at least in the US, say that you're not able to complete your daily living tasks. Like that's kind of the magic, or I can't function in my daily life independently. Those are kind of the magic words. So yeah.
And when you just talk about that, I'm thinking of so many scenarios where that would have helped me, particularly when I become a dad. But for me, it was like you got physio when you're a child with juvenile arthritis, and then the physio wasn't available when you're an adult, or sparingly. Nobody suggested that, my idea of occupational therapists were getting handrails in the bathroom. It wasn't that they could help me with basic parenting stuff or living the life I want to live. So it's a really important point to make, isn't it, that is out there, but we need to keep shouting to get access to these things.
100%. Yeah. And it's the awareness has to go from both ways. Like the patient, it's helpful if patients understand what it is so they can ask for it. But as an occupational therapist, I've also worked on awareness campaigns for providers too, right? Because it shouldn't be on the patient to have to know what to ask for all the time. So yeah, you bring up a good point about pediatrics. My previous work was in pediatrics, and I noticed that pediatrics, they have a lot more multidisciplinary care, a lot more interventions. And with adults, it's like, go figure it out on your own, and to be honest, I was working with children with developmental disabilities in the Seattle area. And I was noticing that some of them were getting actually too, like, legally and ethically, it was considered like, is this tutoring or is this skilled therapy? That's a whole side note. But the point was that like the kids who were maybe didn't even really need that much support were getting these weekly OT sessions. And then I was seeing people with arthritis having like severe challenges functioning in daily life and getting no support, nothing. And so I was like, someone needs to do something. And then I was like, I am someone. So I started Arthritis Life and my, course and support program to bridge that gap between, the patient getting this one little tiny appointment and then having to actually navigate daily life. It's, it's hard to do it on your own.
Yeah, it is. And I think the thing is, for me, it's okay if you're an adult diagnosed with something like RA or whatever. But if you're somebody like me that was diagnosed as a child, and then you go into adult care, you drop off a cliff because you had all of this stuff available, the multidisciplinary approaches and everything else. And then you just completely drop off a cliff, don't you? So,
yes.
Yeah, it's rough. It's rough. You're getting lots of support there, by the way. Amy is I'm sure she won't mind me sharing, just joined. I've become an occupational therapist, so she's very biased and very supportive of what you do. So if we could just wind back, I'd like to know a little bit about how it affected you, like the diagnosis, or how did that onset? And you've already mentioned mental health a couple of times, so I'm guessing you're happy to talk about any link there as well. Just so for our audience to understand a bit how we got to today, what happened back then?
Yeah. So initially, like many young women who present with chronic health issues, I was medically gaslit, and I like to say unintentionally gaslit, because I understand that the definition of gaslighting is like a conscious, overt effort to make someone question their reality. But the fact is that it was accidental. They didn't mean to. They thought that I was not sick, just anxious. But I had all the systemic symptoms of rheumatoid arthritis with only one joint that really hurt enough for me to even mention it. Like, I was an athlete. I was used to having pain on and off. Like, I barely even registered, but I did say, I've had this sprained finger for about a year. Anyway, also, I have severe muscle wasting. I don't know what the kilograms is, but I went from like 130 pounds to 105 pounds. So I lost 20% of my body weight. And that's now I know called rheumatoid cachexia, which is severe muscle wasting as a result of uncontrolled rheumatoid arthritis. I had loss of appetite, early satiety, just inability to eat. And of course, I got mislabeled as hiding an eating disorder. And so it was very traumatic to be not believed by the healthcare system. And it was it was just very deeply confusing because I grew up in a very, I would say like very untraumatic childhood. So like there is a link between childhood adverse events and the development of like chronic conditions later on. But my therapist, my psychologist, and the psychiatrist referred to my childhood as a positive outlier. Like everything in my life was really, I had a wonderful family support, wonderful friends, wonderful teachers, wonderful coaches. Like there was no explanation for why all of a sudden out of the blue, I was becoming so sick. I thought I must have like stomach cancer. So anyway, there's a whole longer thing where I got diagnosed with gastroparesis first, but I started having panic attacks. And then of course you're in this impossible position, right? Because you're like, I know the chicken or the egg is that I was happy and healthy. I started having health issues and then I became anxious. But once you start showing symptoms of anxiety, that becomes the chicken to everyone, right? Or the root cause. Like, oh, well, you're just anxious. I'm like, I swear to you, I was not anxious before this. I had some anxiety, but not health anxiety. Like I was a 20-year-old athlete. I totally just trusted my body. I didn't consider you could get sick out of the blue, right? So then all this lead up is to say, when I got my diagnosis, I woke up one day and suddenly it wasn't just the one sprained finger, it was all my fingers and my toes and my elbows. And then I got the diagnosis. All that led up to me being not upset at all by the diagnosis. I was really relieved and excited about the diagnosis because it meant that I'm not crazy. They believe me, something is wrong, and there's a treatment for it. So, a lot of people, their story is like, I was so upset. I didn't, and that's just not my story. I was happy and relieved when I got my diagnosis. And then I went into medicated remission for 6 years. I gained back the weight I had lost. I was feeling energetic, happy. My anxiety went away. And then I thought that was going to be the rest of my life. But then that only takes us from 2003 to 2009. And now, of course, we're in 2023. So what happened is my first biologic wore off. My body created antibodies to it. And that's the point where I actually realized this is more of a serious condition than I thought. So that's kind of like stage one is like diagnosis, bad, pre-diagnosis, bad, diagnosis, good, early treatment, good. And then first flare up, bad. It's like, that's the first kind of couple mountains. And then do you want me to keep going with the next ones or? Okay. I didn't know if there's any follow-up.
As much as you're comfortable sharing, because I appreciate you told this story more than most, like in our space with, with all the work you do, but yeah, please do.
No, I love sharing. I feel like I am a, very loquacious person. So very talkative, but the second stage was like, then I started my second biologic and then the same kind of thing happened. I got good treatment, or good response to treatment, went into medicated remission again. And then I had a really easy, good pregnancy in 2013 to 14, had my first baby. And then my body freaked out. Like many people, if you don't know, not to scare you, but just knowledge is power, that if you have an autoimmune disease, especially rheumatoid arthritis, typically the pregnancy is good and the postpartum is not. So then my body never responded as well to that medicine. So then in the next stage is like the last, 9 years has been more quick ups and downs of trying a medicine. I'm on my 5th biologic now, and I've never been back. Yeah. So it's like, try one for a few years, it works for a few years, and then my body makes antibodies. It doesn't work anymore, up and down. And I've never been in like full remission again. Remission being like no symptoms of joint pain, no objective clinical signs, but I've been in very mild to moderate disease activity, which I feel fortunate about. So that's like, and it turned out that just to make life a little bit more complicated, I had like,
always the case with
us. I had 3 different acute health things happen. Like I got in a car accident, I got a pulmonary cyst, and then I got a really bad GI virus that set off my gastroparesis again in 2016 and 17. And then my anxiety came back with panic attacks and claustrophobia, which is like fear of being trapped. I started feeling trapped
understandably with everything you went through.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people, it's like naming something can be really powerful, right? So when I found out there's a word like claustrophobia, that's not just claustrophobia, which is a fear of being in a small space, but claustrophobia is a fear of being trapped, regardless how big the space is. It's like that, even knowing there was a name for it made me feel less like, again, I'm a freak or something's wrong with me. And so, I've gone to therapy, gone through exposure therapy for that, which is like the most evidence-based therapeutic approach for phobias, it turns out. Is like, doing small exposures, like starting with an elevator on one floor, then going to 2 floors, then going to 3 floors, then going on like a gondola, like a small, and then airplanes are still a challenge. But that's where my therapy for that, I was exposed to acceptance and commitment therapy, which it turns out is a really wonderful, that's like if cognitive behavior therapy and mindfulness practices had a baby. And that's what I ended up discovering was really helpful for the perpetual chronic, illness challenges like uncertainty, ambiguity, dealing with things out of your control. I ended up discovering that was really helpful too. So I integrated that into some of my work. But yeah, it's I think like the big lesson for me of the last 10 years has been learning that, as a recovering control freak, like not everything's in my control, and that I can live with that instead of like fighting against it. Cause I think I spent a long time, right, trying to control the uncontrollable, right? When you do that.
It really is. We've talked about that on the show so many times, and how I spent far too much of my life trying to blame somebody or push against it, or and we do, don't we? We tend to, it's so refreshing to hear you talking about these things, because we tend to think it's something we've done, or that we've failed, or that somebody else would have handled it better, and this sort of thing. So to hear somebody saying that, I had all these comorbidities and these other things that went alongside of my condition, and that's okay. That wasn't my fault. That wasn't anything you could control. That was just what comes with the territory, isn't it?
Yeah. And I talk a lot about like the acceptance paradox, because like, I'm gonna try to put this into words coherently, but it's like, it's scary to really accept the idea of acceptance, not to get too meta, but because accepting the things that are out of your control is initially like depressing, because you're like, okay, there are like, okay, the illusion of control is comforting. Thinking that if you just tried hard enough, if you just worked harder, if you found the right provider that's going to heal or cure or make your condition go away, that's a very comforting thought, right? But it's ultimately an illusion to build your life around that. So the paradox is that acceptance feels like giving up or giving into something negative, but actually it frees you, it opens you up to the possibility of, okay, let's actually look this thing in the face. If there are things in my life that are out of my control, can I still live a good life? What can I still do to live according to my values and to just have a, robust, vibrant existence within the confines of my illness? It's like my therapist told me about this. So I'm a very visual person. He said there was this cartoon in the New Yorker. I've never been able to find it, but it really resonated with my mind. Like the idea was that there was somebody he's holding on, a person in like, it looks like a jail cell, and they're holding on to these 2 bars, and there's bars on either side of them and in front of them, and they're holding on to the bars, and they're behind them, there's no bars. Like if they turned around, they would realize they can get out, but they're not looking that way. And that to me feels like a metaphor for acceptance, where you're like, the bars that you're holding on to is like this idea that you have to cure or heal, eliminate all your pain, eliminate all discomfort in your life. And if you turn around, there is this other way. It doesn't mean that the pain and discomfort goes away. It means that you can live alongside them. And it's hard to let go. The bars are like the illusion of control, but
yeah, I love that. And like you said earlier, it's wasted energy as well, isn't it? When you're pushing in the wrong direction. So and I'm sure that's a theme that's going to come up quite a bit tonight. Before we move on to the stuff you're doing now, I just wanted to jump back, because you said you're on your 5th biologic. Like, how does that feel? Because I know like it's an area that doesn't come up a lot. You see so many people on social media that are desperate to jump to biologics without maybe understanding what they're on for the here and now. And they assume there's going to be this miracle drug. And for a lot of us, they do amazing things, but then it doesn't always work. And lots of people have sort of failed. And obviously what people might not understand is every time one fails, it's kind of another door closed, isn't it, to your options. So
Yeah.
what is your options like now after being on 5 biologics?
Well, I think if you, not to be too nerdy, but if you understand the history of it, it is a little bit more comforting, like objectively comforting. Because when I was diagnosed and put on my first biologic, which was a TNF inhibitor, which were the oldest biologic class of medications, there were only 3 medications available. And now there are 9, as far as I know, FDA approved medications that are biologic in nature for rheumatoid arthritis. So I've literally done the math because I'm a huge nerd. So I'm like, okay, I'm 42 years old. Like 3 of my 4 grandparents lived to like 94. Now, none of them had a chronic health condition, but that I know of. And one of them was a Christian Scientist. So we have no idea what she had because she never went to the doctor. But anyway, so I know if we keep getting, like 6 more meds every 20 years, I should be okay. You know what I'm saying? Like, but again, that's no guarantee. There are the flip side of these medications, biologics being so expensive, is that there is a financial incentive for drug companies to develop more of them. So there, and I have a friend who's an investment banker, and she's like, oh yeah, there's a lot more coming down the pipeline. So, there's 2 different approaches, right? There's comforting yourself with the available data. And then there's the mindfulness-based approach of like, we have no idea what's going to happen in the future. I don't know if maybe those 6 meds will actually go away and I'll have 0 options.
Yeah.
But connecting to the present moment and realizing that that's the only thing I know for sure, that's also a helpful way to respond. Like I remind people a lot, and myself, like, what were your biggest worries on March 1st, 2020? Like, even if you made a plan for all those worries, if those worries didn't include the pandemic, like they were pointless. Do you know what I mean?
Really
so like those are the 2 different responses. But I will say, I think it's important to know, this is maybe me being in a healthcare field, but if you're watching the video, like I have really, for having rheumatoid arthritis that was diagnosed as severe rheumatoid arthritis at the time, given all of my numbers were off the charts. Like they literally, my mom said, like the charts just didn't go high enough to measure like my SED rate and my like rheumatoid factor. The fact that like I do have very mild deformities, like I'm still able to move. If you're listening to the recording, I'm moving all my fingers pretty well. Like I have a tiny amount of ulnar drift, but the fact that I've quote unquote failed some of these medications, it's still what you would imagine the progression of the average patient diagnosed without these medications. I would have been in a much worse place with no medicine. So even if you fail the medicine, medicine fails you, you're still armed with a lot more powerful tools than we've ever had, so that 80% of patients do well on these therapies. There are the 10 to 20%, depending on the study you look at, that have what's defined as difficult to treat RA, which unfortunately you don't know if you have that until it becomes difficult to treat. But that's the people where they cycle through all 8 or 9 biologics in like 2 years. And so that's a much more dire situation. I think for me, the fact that I have had a positive response that's lasted me, to me, it's like glass half full, glass half empty. I guess, I've gone through 5 in 20 years, but I at least took 20 years to go through them. It wasn't like 2 years,
I love that. And I think that the way you just described all that just sums Cheryl up in a nutshell. But the reason I highlight that is because we get lots of people coming to the community or some of our support groups we run. And it's always like, I'm on X, Y, and Z. I want to get to biologics. How do I get to biologics? I want to jump through all the hoops and race to biologics. And I think it's really important that we take a minute every now and then and remind people that isn't always the be all and end all. And sometimes there are steps before there that work for others. And then the biologics work for some, not for others, etc. So that's the only reason I'm highlighting that, just to remind people that everyone's different and what works for one isn't always going to be working for another. So thanks for the extra context on that. I really appreciate it. And I'm keen to talk about like what brought you over to like social media. How did Cheryl Crow jump from living with this and being an OT to then wanting to share that and be so open? Because as somebody that's in that same space, it's got its challenges when you're trying to look after yourself and try and help others and all that sort of thing. Was there a spark for that, or was it just an organic thing that happened? Could you tell us a little bit about that?
I think so. I joined Twitter. I initially was on Facebook and Instagram when they first came out, but then I joined Twitter in 2010 during an occupational therapy conference. And Twitter's use like really heavily in like the scientific community to like during conferences and stuff. And I had so much fun connecting to other professionals, and I was kind of like, okay, this is interesting. And then actually, other little hobby of mine is swing dancing. And believe it or not, this directly relates to arthritis and sharing my story, because in like 2011 or so, I made a video called Dancing with Arthritis. And someone from the Arthritis Foundation, my local chapter, found that and was like, this girl seems outgoing. Like she'd want to share her story. She asked me to speak at the local juvenile arthritis camp in person. And I had so much fun doing that. And I ended up I don't know, you know this, Joel, once you start being out there with your story, people are like, you get asked if they like you, I guess you get asked to do more and more things like, oh, can you come to Washington, DC and speak? I'm like very unshy, right? So I was the person, my dad growing up, I was born in 1981. My dad had the giant camcorder with the VHS tape in it. I would always be jumping in front of it. So part of it is I was always intrinsically comfortable in front of the camera and comfortable sharing my story. Like I remember in second grade, my teacher had to like tell me to stop doing, they call it show and tell. Do they call that in the UK?
Yeah. We're familiar with it from movies, if not, yeah.
From movies, yeah. So my teacher was like, okay, Cheryl, you have to give other kids a turn. Like that's how I was, so I don't have advice for somebody who's like really shy, because I don't have I mean, I could give you advice, but it's not from experience, But yeah, for me, it was very cathartic. It felt like I was able to sharing my story and seeing people's responses, like whether it was starting my blog, like theenthusiasticlife.com or the YouTube channel. It was one little thing at a time. It was just people asked, do you have a YouTube channel? I'm like, no, maybe I should make one, and it was like getting the responses for me. It was so gratifying to see that, there's this phrase, and maybe it's cliche by now, but I really love the phrase, like turning your pain into purpose, like you've done with this show is, being, hey, here's some things I learned the hard way. Let me share them with you. And I will say, I was always open with my arthritis story. The thing that I was not open about until the last 3 or 4 years was sharing about anxiety. And I think it was because I was so traumatized by my experience in 2003, getting mislabeled as only anxious, not sick, that I was like, I was worried that if I admitted this fault of having, I'm saying that in quotes, I know it's not a fault now, but if I admitted this weakness, which I thought of it as a weakness, then people would think that like my anxiety somehow caused my arthritis, or that they would just see me as, it's intersectional, because it's like I did have like a privileged upbringing, so there was a barrier for me of seeking therapy, because I was like, why should you feel sad, or why should you feel anxious? Like you have everything except for your health. Like not realizing that just having health issues alone is enough to need to go to therapy. Like I was like, but everything, you didn't have a trauma growing up. Like you never were abused. Like why should you go to therapy? Like I had this misconception that therapy was only for people with like severe things that had happened. So long story short, I was hesitant to share about anxiety initially. I think there's just a much bigger stigma against anxiety and mental health. So I'm really happy that I've, been able to overcome that, because people have told me, there's a funny Star Trek quote where the guy goes, it's a meme someone made. So I wish I knew who made this, but they go, oh, I didn't know you were anxious. Like you always look so, like you look so happy and you look so positive. And the Star Trek guy's like, do not mistake composure for ease. I thought that's so true, right? Like I am happy. I'm a happy-go-lucky, energetic person. And in the wrong context, or in the context of my triggers, that energy goes from happy to anxious, like really fast, and I know it's hard to imagine when you look at somebody that seems so happy, but it's like, you're not seeing me at my worst. And when I'm at my worst, I'm not thinking of bringing the camera out, so anyway, that's a whole other thing.
No, I totally relate. And because like for somebody who has depression and talks about depression as a comorbidity to my disease, I get the similar sort of thing where people will be like, well, you're being productive, therefore you can't be depressed. You wouldn't be able to function. And you can be totally functional with this stuff, or appear to be, keeping ends up, and then but in the background not be. And so I think it's really important that we talk about that. And And yeah, don't apologize for the detail, because the state of my voice tonight, I'm very grateful. So
You've interviewed the right person for having, for having a
it's
sore voice.
brilliant.
I'll go on a monologue all night.
Yeah, I'll just keep putting flashcards up on the screen and you can chat. But yeah, but like I say, thank you for sharing that, because someone that comes from completely the other side, like as somebody that wrote and his writing took off, and I felt completely unnatural in front of camera. I still do. It's why I don't do reels. I failed on TikTok miserably. I can't,
No, you haven't.
I watch your videos and they're just amazing, and the energy is amazing. So, but like you say, it's so therapeutic, isn't it? And it becomes this like snowball effect. I suppose we must be good at it somewhere along the line, but you do something once and somebody asks you, and then it just grows, and you suddenly you stop and you look around, you think, how the hell did I get here? And you're doing these things you never thought you would be comfortable doing and talking about for the cause. So I always say it's quite a selfish thing sometimes, because I do it because it helps me as much as it helps other people,
Yeah, I mean, it can be so many things at the same time. It's cathartic for you personally and meaningful for you personally, and it's helping others. That's like a win-win, I would say.
Yeah. I'm really keen to talk about your Room to Thrive programs and how you created all of those. But I feel like I should say, because I'm still reeling from you telling us your age at the start, like clearly yourself is an advert for your whatever you're now about to talk about, because you look so amazing and young for someone who's, and you've had RA since a young age as well. So I don't know how you do it. And I think you said somebody in your family lived to 96, so clearly it's in the genes.
Well, also, but sadly, skin cancer runs in my family. And this is where anxiety is interesting. You could see some of the early seeds of anxiety for me, but it manifested as health protective behavior. So first, I never drank alcohol, never did drugs. I was petrified that if I drank one sip of alcohol, I would die. Right. I was, so there you're like, okay, that helped you, but that's like extreme. That's not normal. Like a normal teenager experiment in the US, at least, experiments with alcohol or drugs a little bit, it doesn't have that magnified of a fear. But I also had a fear of getting sunburned and getting skin cancer. So I put sunscreen on. So that's why my skin looks good, I say, and maybe genetics, but yeah. Okay. So to the program, and I don't know, I have a little bit of elasticity. So they say people with EDS, Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, end up looking really young. They have the collagen's really loose. I don't have an EDS diagnosis to my knowledge, but it's interesting because I do have like elastic skin. So
I just had to refuse to believe that you're in your 40s, but I
was born in 1981. Yeah, I don't know how to explain it, but so Room to Thrive, this is the third name for it, by the way. So I started basically in the pandemic. I was like going a little stir crazy like everyone else. And I had started Arthritis Life. Actually, I almost named it the Arthritis Life Talk Show. So it's so funny, I love the name Chronic Pain Talk Show. And I initially envisioned Arthritis Life, or the talk show, as primarily a YouTube channel with maybe a tie-in, other social media presence. And I wanted to do interviews, and I wanted to do little product demonstration videos of life hacks for arthritis, like Arthritis Life. Like the life is an acronym for life hacks, interviews, fun, and education. So I started that. And then when the pandemic hit in March of 2020, I was like, I also had hoped to maybe have a little Arthritis Life clinic, like occupational therapy clinic in Seattle. And then I was suddenly like, okay, well, nothing is happening in person. And so in 2019, I also got trained in something that is called the Chronic Illness Self-Management Program, which is like developed out of Stanford University. And it basically, self-management, if you haven't heard of that term before, means like, for people with chronic conditions, the little tools, tips, strategies, behaviors that they do on a daily basis to manage their condition. So that could be for diabetes, for heart disease, for arthritis, things like protecting your joints, using ice or heat, and it includes the mental health strategies, the social skills. And I really liked that program, but I thought, okay, this is very general and broad. It would be really amazing to make one of these for rheumatoid arthritis and inflammatory forms of arthritis. And I was like, let me check out what else is available, because I didn't want to recreate the wheel. And I was like, wow, there's nothing. Like I just couldn't find it. I also was like, wouldn't it be neat if there was like an option to go through at your own pace, but also like an option with a group, right, where you could ask questions. And I was like, geez, am I just not looking the right terms or what? But eventually I just was like, I have to make this like, and there is evidence, by the way, just from as a occupational therapist, which is like a licensed health professional, I feel like I'm beholden. I know I'm beholden to like ethical standards, and I would be even if I wasn't an OT, right? But it's just something to note that like there's evidence, scientific evidence that people who participate in self-management groups and programs have better outcomes in terms of mental health, pain, and just general life function. That's like on the CDC website in the United States, the Center for Disease Control. So that's interesting. So I was like, okay, this is a valid thing to do. So I created, it was called initially the Beginner's Guide to Life with Rheumatoid Arthritis. And then I called it the RA Roadmap. And then I expanded it to include all rheumatic diseases that involve arthritis as a symptom. So people still think it's rheumatoid arthritis only because rheum, but for me, rheum is short for rheumatic disease. So primarily ankylosing spondylitis or other spondyloarthritis, and then psoriatic arthritis and rheumatoid. And so, I just put together, so also THRIVE is an acronym. I can't stop with the acronyms. So the THRIVE acronym stands for like tools for pain and fatigue, helpful habits, which is like the lifestyle things like nutrition, exercise, sleep. The I is inner world, which is like mental health tips. The V is values, or R is relationships. Sorry, I skipped over that. Relationships and social life. And that's like explaining to friends and family what you have, which we could do a whole 5-hour seminar on. It's so hard, right?
Yeah.
And then there's the V is values and valued activities, which goes along with ACT, committing to your values. And then E is executive function. So right now I have a year-round, like you could do the self-paced course anytime. And then I have these 12-week support groups that I offer in the spring and in the fall. So right now, actually, the Monday one is starting tomorrow. There is there's a Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday option this fall. The Wednesday one is 9:30 a.m. my time, which is 12:30 p.m. Eastern, which is 5:30 p.m. British time. And so I try to make a few different options of times that work for people. And that's an opportunity to go through with like a group of like 16 or less people. And I meet with you every week on Zoom. And it's been wonderful. It's just, I wish that this was just something that everyone who got diagnosed got as part of like standard care that was reimbursed by insurance. But right now it's like, I can't wait around for that to happen. Like I have to do my own thing, to just bridge this gap. I'm happy to answer. I don't know if anyone's asking me. Oh yeah, thank you for putting the links in the chat.
Okay. And I'm going to put the one in chat. And guys, if you listen to this on the podcast back or anything, the links will be in the description. But yeah, if anyone's unable to do the ones that are running now, then I believe they can use that link there to sign up for the ones later in the year or next year even. Yeah. Yeah,
there's also the ones you can do the wait list for the spring 2024 ones. And I want to be able to scale this so that, people can access it who maybe are in different time zones or different days of the week. Sometimes I used to do a Saturday morning group, but now I can't because of like my son's activity schedule. So I want to grow it. But yeah, right now it's just a matter of just giving people that step-by-step guidance and teaching them the evidence-based tools in a way that's like systematic. Because that's the irony of, right, the internet is that we have access to so much information and a lot of it's valid, but it's a lot to sift through and go through on your own. So, yeah.
And I think it's really important that I should probably say here is like, as someone who's a massive proponent of social prescribing and pain management, and I've just been asked to talk at my local pain management group again in a couple of weeks' time to try and remind people to stay the course if it feels foreign. Like I'm someone who 3-4 years ago would have never wanted to talk in a group to other people, living with the conditions, and then talking about, like we did earlier, with changing your perspective and where you focus your energy and stop looking to blame things and try and work with it and everything else, that shifted everything for me. And now I'm using like social prescribing and programs like this every day of my life to cope. But you only have to go back 3 years, and I'm quite embarrassed to say it, but I think it's really important that we share that them views exist. That 3 years ago I thought I had to see a doctor and I had to have a pill and that was it. There was nothing else that was going to make my quality of life any better. So I think it's really important that you're filling those gaps, and I'd like to think at some point people will notice what you're doing, and hopefully you can get some even more sort of weight behind what you're doing.
Yeah. And I think you make, you make a really good point about people having, you have to be ready to join a group and you have to want to join a group. And I have a little paid part of my website that says like FAQs. And like one of the FAQs is like, is this the right program for everyone? And I'm like, no, because some people, first of all, if you're looking for a program that's just, about one lifestyle factor. Like I want to do a 12-week exercise program where that's all we talk about every week. We exercise and we do that. Like I have lots of recommendations for other programs that are like specific, right? For specific to nutrition and diet, specific to exercise. This is like, that's the self-management, like, overview. I almost think about it as like the orientation course, right? It's like a new job. Your job is being a chronic illness patient. And this is like your orientation and your little cohort that you're going through your orientation with. And then I also say, there's people who really benefit more from going through this one-on-one. There's people who want like a one-on-one guide. And there's other like health coaches and people who do that. I love the group process. I love seeing people go from maybe in the beginning, one of the members, Katie, she shared her story. She gave me permission to share it publicly. And that this testimonial that she said, in the beginning, she didn't think she was ever going to even take herself off of, or she never thought she was going to share her video, much less raise her hand and talk in the group. And that by the end, she was talking and supporting. She realized that like, it was therapeutic for her to raise her hand in response to someone else and share her ideas. First of all, it's not just about what you get from the group members, but also about that therapeutic value of like sharing support and encouragement. And every single time within the first 2 weeks, I got multiple people saying, I thought I was the only one. Like I thought that I failed to manage this perfectly. Everyone else seems to be doing it so well. What's wrong with me? But a group environment is intimidating. I think it to people who are more introverted or shy about sharing their personal thoughts and feelings. Not everyone, I joke that not everyone wants to like barf up all their feelings to the universe like I am, but it is something that if you do, if you think in the back of your mind that this might be something that's interesting to you, I do urge people to try it. And if it's not a good fit for you, you can always, I give people refunds, like, if no questions asked, if it's not the right fit, it's not the right fit. It's only happened a few times. Usually it's happened because someone had something come up and then they're suddenly not available. But one person was like sometimes people think the group's too big. They think the group's too small. Like, it's just about finding that right fit for you. Unfortunately, there aren't like a ton of options. But like, hopefully there will be more, in terms of if you don't like my group, I can't be like, here's a group that's like super similar, but there are some programs that depending on where you live that are a little bit similar. Oh, there is one in New Zealand that's about to come out through a nonprofit there, which is really exciting.
Yeah, that's good. They're doing really good stuff in New Zealand and Australia around chronic pain as well, like out of the box kind of, again, social prescribing kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. I don't know, are you familiar with that term in America?
I think, is it prescribing, social interaction as part of...
Yeah, so things like, encouraging rather than looking for that magic bullet, more that getting people connected with others, peer support, maybe local employment services if you've lost your job, all that sort of thing, that bigger picture stuff. And for me, that was just like a light bulb going off. And that's what then led me to do this sort of thing and create peer support and what you're doing as well. I think it's really important to fill those gaps. And it might not feel like it at times, but we're kind of showing the historic, well-established kind of traditional healthcare delivery that there are alternative approaches, aren't there, that can help.
Yeah. I mean, it's like everyone who has a diagnosis, typically initially there's like this social impulse to just find somebody who's been there, like, can I just talk to a human? And a lot of times doctors will, and this is more prevalent in the older days, they would say, don't go to social media, you're going to get scared. If you Google rheumatoid arthritis, you might get scared, but it's like, you can't tell. Like, human nature is such that it's very unrealistic to tell someone with a lifelong chronic disease diagnosis, when you've only given them one 20-minute appointment, to then don't Google it. Like, that's not human nature. Like, and so it's finding valid sources of support. The flip side of social media and social support is that the thing you were talking about, the magic cures, that you were wishing that for the magic cure. I think Instagram is where I see this the most. There's a lot of like snake oil salespeople. And that's true. It's always going to be true for any chronic condition, that there's going to be people who are like, I have the secret. I have the magic pills. Doctors don't want you to know, this or that. And so it can be frustrating sometimes to feel like those messages are so enticing, right? Because it is human nature to want that.
You're desperate, and we're programmed. You break your leg, you go to hospital, you get it fixed, and unfortunately, the system doesn't always apply to the same way that for chronic illnesses as it does for sort of triage stuff. And I think that's what you're doing is really important, because you've got those pulls, haven't you? So I find if you go to Facebook, you're more likely to get them worst case scenario kind of doom and gloom experiences, which are going to put people in a really bad place mentally. But then conversely, you go over to Instagram and you're going to see people in their best filtered lives, and you're going to feel like you're failing and you're inferior. So I think, what you're doing is really important, to put people in a space together where they can say, I get it. And sometimes it is a bit crap. And then other times you can improve by, have you tried this and have you tried that? But from people that get it, not them, have you tried experiences we've all had from people that don't understand.
No. And you make such a good point about, Instagram versus Facebook. There's definitely different vibes. And I think it really, when I first decided, like, I actually thought really hard about whether I was going to make Arthritis Life a nonprofit organization or a for-profit. I ultimately went with for-profit because it was easier for me to imagine a path for it to be sustainable. Like, unfortunately, at least in the US, a lot of the nonprofits, it's hard to get funding for education and peer support. A lot of people just want to fund like a cure, which I get, but it's like, okay, instead of asking for these outside donations to help the people, it's like the people, I offer scholarships and pay what you can, sliding scale fees, and I offer, the full price option. And then it's like the people who are paying get the benefit versus, it's just a different model. And it's also, if you're a nonprofit, you don't ultimately have control. This is me being a control freak. Like, the board of directors has a lot more control than the founder. And so I was like, I want to be able to do what I want, what I think is right for the program when I want to. And I was like, that's the only way it would be that I could figure it out, was to do like a kind of a socially minded, social entrepreneurship type for profit. But when I was first thinking about marketing this as a program, I was really sensitive to it, right? Like I thought to myself, are people even going to want to invest in a program that is not telling them, I'm not telling you you're going to necessarily eliminate your pain, conquer your condition, guaranteed to thrive. Like, thriving is like kind of the aspirational goal that we're working towards, but I'm not guaranteeing you're going to get there. And it's like, because that's not realistic, and it's not concurrent with my values, because I think it's important to confront the things out of our control, that you can do everything right and still have a flare up, and then we can learn to cope with that. But luckily, I've been able to kind of thread this needle of like, you will learn the tools for your toolbox. You will also learn how to cope when those tools don't work,
Yeah, totally. And I was going to say, that funding issue, we see it here in the UK as well, in that, an organisation's idea of peer support is, I will chuck a forum up, and then that just tends to be let's compare who's worst, and it goes down a spiral into a dark place that nobody's ever coming out of again. So it's a real issue. So I think, the work you're doing and other people who've had on the show, that's why we try to highlight it, because I think it really does highlight those gaps, and hopefully shows some best practice for those that maybe aren't broadening their horizons. So I've just seen the time. I don't know how we've flown by. I'm sorry for keeping you longer than I kind of promised I would. But so for anyone who's listening to this, I'd really like to know more. Where can they find more about the Room for Thrive? Where can they find you? How could they get involved? Like, you're over to you to sort of basically tell people where they can get in touch and access these things.
Yeah. So my website is arthritis.theenthusiasticlife.com. I got that The Enthusiastic Life URL back in 2010 when I started my original blog. So, and then my email is info@myarthritislife.net. So if you put in myarthritislife.net, it's like a redirect to the theenthusiasticlife.com. I feel very tech savvy. I know you're more tech savvy than I am. And unfortunately, all my URLs for my different I'm on all the social media outlets. I'm most frequently on Instagram and TikTok, but they're all different handles. But on Instagram, it's arthritis_life_Cheryl with a CHERYL. And then on TikTok, it's just Arthritis Life, which is the easier one to remember. But I love hearing from people. I also have my own podcast, Arthritis Life Podcast.
Oh yeah, we didn't get round to that. It was on my list.
No, and
we
you're
didn't get round to talking about that.
Yeah, you're one of the people who's been on the podcast. Thank you so much for sharing your story. It's mostly sharing patient stories, but about maybe 25% of them are provider interviews with like provider perspectives or just solo episodes from me. But, that the podcast is just, again, to form like your show to, showcase patient stories, showcase what's worked and not worked for people, help people feel less alone and more empowered. So.
And for anyone watching this live, our wonderful moderator is putting the links to some of your socials in the chat. But Cheryl's really undersold herself, by the way. She has an amazing social media.
Oh.
I don't know how you actually have the effort, because I struggle keeping up with Instagram and Facebook.
I still struggle.
Your energy and your output is phenomenal. So you put us all to shame. And Cheryl's probably underplayed her very successful podcast there as well, guys. So go check that out. I will put it in the show notes. Link to that.
Oh yeah. Well. We just reached earlier this year over 100,000 downloads in 3 years, which is
and
super
you totally
exciting.
didn't mention that. It's just phenomenal.
100 and actually right now today I just saw this 100 and logging into the back end 123,000.
Yeah, I might as well quit, guys, now and just point everything to show.
No. It's over 100. It's only over 100. It's over 102. Episodes. But yeah, and what's funny is I'll give you this last little thing, which is that initially I was really reluctant to produce a podcast based on my videos, because initially I thought I would do video interviews because I thought my voice is kind of annoying. Like everyone doesn't like the sound of their voice. Do you know what I mean?
True. Yeah, that's true.
Especially
me tonight.
No, your voices are great, but that's like, it's just a little thing. Like I was just like, no one's gonna want to listen to my voice. But then I was like, I've already done the work to make these videos with the interviews. Why not just take the audio and turn it into a podcast? And then it became, more successful and people were excited about it. And then I got used to exposure therapy, got used to my own voice. So, thank you. Wow. You haven't done the program, but your channel has been a ton of help. Thank you so much. Nate, is that Nate Cheeks? Oh, no. Who said that? Sorry.
No, that was from from another channel, Easy Like Sunday Morning Show.
Oh, fun. Oh, I got to check out that channel too. That's so nice. Yeah. And that's the great thing about sharing your stories. You get those positive pieces of feedback that help you move,
They really do. When it feels like you're not making progress, it's like I'm sure you've had it with your podcast or whatever, where it feels like, oh, what was the point? No, that didn't reach anyone. And then something lands in your inbox and you realize that was worth it. Just that one person getting something from it alone was absolutely worth it.
100%.
And everything you're doing. Guys, Cheryl's been brilliant tonight and covered for my voice a lot. I'm also conscious of time, but she's totally probably undersold all of the amazing stuff we do there. We could have talked a lot more about your work and yeah, like I say, podcast, go check out, guys. The Room for Thrive program is amazing. And Cheryl's energy online as well as unparalleled. So
thank you so much. You too. Have a great day, everyone listening, and I hope to see you on the internet somewhere.
Thank you, Cheryl, for joining us. Really appreciate it. Have a good one.
Thank you.